Hey there, everybody. How's it going? And welcome to Real Time, where we are live talking about film and television and everything in between. Thank you all so much for joining me on this impromptu live stream. I have a very special guest, somebody who is a veteran with the civil rights movement and how that ties in with film and the portrayal of African Americans, Mustafaa Caroll. So let's dive right into it. Hey there, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Mustafaa Talib here with Cinema King Productions, and I'm very excited to have today's guest on. Like I said, a veteran with the civil rights movement, somebody who has been involved on the ground, helping the African American community, and then as well as in the more recent years, the Muslim community at large. So without further ado, please help me welcome the Honorable Mustafaa Caroll. You are on.
Assalamu alaikum, bro.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you again so much for taking the time on being on the show Real Time.
No problem.
How you been?
I've been good,
Staying busy during this time of quarantine and
Yeah, I mean,
Corona.
it's amazing because, this is going to cause us to have, more skills technologically,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we're using all of our, Zoom and FaceTime and all that stuff. So there's a silver lining behind this, I guess.
Yes,
And that's
yes.
it, is that we're going to learn how to have meetings without having to, we're going to have more virtual meetings, I think, in the future.
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of the technology that we have at our fingertips, with our
Absolutely.
smartphones and then, of course, our computers as well.
Yeah.
Real quickly, anybody who's watching, if y'all have any questions regarding the civil rights movement or the portrayal of African Americans in film and cinema, please leave them in the comments down below. I'll be looking over and we'll try to address them as soon as they come in. So with that, let's dive right in and wind the clock back a little bit and briefly tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, originally born and raised in Gary, Indiana. I've come from a family of four boys. My father was a steel worker. My mother was a nurse. Left Gary after high school, attended Indiana University, where I did my undergraduate work in biology and psychology. Met my wife there, got married, had two kids in Indiana well over 20 years ago, and then
Yeah.
moved to Texas well over 20 years ago and had two more kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been active I've been an activist since I was at least 14 years old. I started off in the NAACP Youth
Mm-hmm.
Council. Before I turned 16, I was the president of the Youth Council. Um, shortly before my 16th birthday, and shortly before Dr. King was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
So those were some real tumultuous times, and that's how I came into the NAACP. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, I went to college, and I was active there, doing work at Plainsfield Boys School and
Mm-hmm.
several other projects. Vice president of Black Student Union. And then, the rest is, as they say, is history. I came to Texas and
Mm-hmm.
continued doing community work. And I tell people all the time, you retire from Raytheon, Boeing, AT&T, etc., but you
Yeah.
never retire from community work.
No,
You
no,
have
you
to
do not.
die. You have to die to get out of it.
Yeah, you do,
Yeah, and it's
unfortunately.
okay. It's okay. That's our purpose. I was raised like that. My folks
Mm-hmm.
felt that if you don't help the community, you just no good. That's how I was
Mm-hmm.
raised. So that's what I've been doing.
It's a great model to live by.
Hmm.
So let's kind of dive right in and I mean, with your involvement with the civil rights movement, what role did film, television, or media in general play during that time?
Oh my God. I mean, there's so many parts to that. Well, in terms of the civil rights movement itself, it helped to illustrate just how dire things were. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we have more access to technology now than we
Yes.
did then, and then it was just TV. And so I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, the country was in turmoil,
Mm-hmm.
So, I remember seeing dogs being sicked on youth my age, younger.
Mm-hmm.
I remember all of those things. I saw. I was, like I was a kid then. I was a kid when Malcolm X was killed. That was on
Mm-hmm.
television. When Dr. King was assassinated. When John F. Kennedy was killed, and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things were connected in some fashion or form.
Mm-hmm.
So, I remember the beginning of the Black Panther movement, and I remember how many of us we were just enthralled by what we saw and angry. And
Mm-hmm.
I stayed angry for a long time. You can't watch that kind of stuff and not be angry. And
Right.
I stayed angry. I don't know if it's a low grade anger or what have you, but I kept it with me, not on purpose. It's just the way I was at that time. And I think
And
there were many folks like that.
and that, I guess, fueled you
So,
into becoming involved.
well, yeah. And then look, my folks, I have a lot of family history.
Mm-hmm.
My maternal grandfather was born in 1865. He was born
Wow.
10 months after the 13th Amendment, and he died in 1966.
Mm-hmm.
So he was 101 years old, from Russell County, Alabama. Was in probably the first wave of the Great Migration
Oh
from
wow.
Russell County, Alabama, up to East Chicago, Indiana, with 14 kids and a wife.
Mm.
Joined the UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association, and then, if you know any, that's the Marcus Garvey Back to Africa movement.
Right.
My mother says had all of them packed up and ready to go back when Garvey got deported, arrested and deported.
Yeah.
So I have a significant amount of, I guess, family history or whatever legacy that goes with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't learn about that until, I was probably your age,
Oh.
because my mother was afraid to tell us or was shamed or whatever.
Right.
Who knows? But she didn't want to tell us, I think, because they knew I was already angry. So it
Mm-hmm.
didn't, they didn't want to push me over the edge.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
So I guess tying it into what recently has been occurring in the media in our time, how is this relevant to what is happening currently with the protests against the violence committed towards the black community?
Well, this has been going on forever. This is not, this has
Mm-hmm.
been all of my life. That that killing of black men and women
Mm-hmm.
has been going on, and I mean, I'm not talking about criminal. I'm talking about black folks have been like almost
Your
hunted
average
down
citizen.
before I was even born. And so, we've had this has been a culmination of things. And if you look at the more recent history, when you talk about, Trayvon,
Mm-hmm.
Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray,
Yes.
Eric Garner, and I mean the list just is so it
It
just
keeps
goes
going.
on and on and on, and people have been in denial. I think the
Mm-hmm.
country has been in denial about what is going on in the black community, and people don't want to believe, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that the police would do something as heinous as kill innocent people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we were telling them that this was happening back in the day, it was hard to. You didn't have the technology that you have now.
Right.
Now you have what, cell phones. People can put this stuff on Instagram, Facebook, etc., and it'll
Yeah.
go viral. So it's
Right.
a
So there's
whole
no
different
denying
story.
it.
What's
Yeah.
that?
There's no denying it. Like it is happening. There's no, being protected from the reality of outside, etc. This is the reality for, this community.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's what's amazing to me is that you still have people who are in denial after seeing it. They'll see it and say, "I wonder what the rest of the tape said or did.
Ugh.
What did he do before they shot him?"
Right.
You look at Alton Sterling, and the police had his knee on this man's back and said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, he got a gun." Shot him at point blank range after he was subdued on the ground.
Right.
And then, then you got Philando Castile. He
Mm-hmm.
says, "I'm a security guard. I have a weapon in the car." The guy comes around, empties his revolver into this guy with his kid watching. I mean, what are we supposed to do? And then when we say something, people think, "Oh, you all just complaining. You need to train your children." Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
You know, and it's just
and that's
it's
not right.
frustrating. It's
Yeah.
frustrating.
Of course, from all angles, it's just like, well, no, it's not real, and like just the deniability, like everybody just denies it, and like you said, the frustration just builds up over and over again. Um, Kind of shifting gears a little bit, since we do talk on the show about film and and television. What are the effects in society of the portrayal of black people in movies and the roles that they play?
Oh goodness. I'm gonna go back a little bit. When I was a child, we watched the movies. The things that portrayed blacks then was real submissive, almost playful
Mm,
buffoonery. Like there were a lot
mm,
of jokesters, and but you weren't seen as threatening in them early years. You had shows like Amos and Andy,
mm-hmm,
and other shows, other things. When you were portrayed,
mm-hmm,
of course, there were some iconic films. Uh, like Porgy and Bess, and those types of things. But what happened in the '70s, in the '60s,
mm-hmm.
was you had a whole slew of what they call black exploitation
Yep.
films that came out. Superfly and Shaft and all of these things, and they
Yep.
built up this image of a threatening black man, a threatening black figure. Now,
Mm-hmm,
that image was already being portrayed in some quarters or all quarters
mm-hmm,
of the society. But now you throw this on TV, and they put bad white folks on TV. You've seen
mm-hmm.
characters, but the problem with television when it came to the black community was
Mm-hmm.
that it was stereotyped or typecast. Like
Right.
those are the only images you see. So you normally, what would the common person think when they
Mm-hmm.
see that? They say, "Oh well, they all this or they all that," and watch out and this type of thing. So
And that's the unfortunate power of the media.
yeah, and it was really damaging. And what's even worse about it is that it influences how we see ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
you have black people who see themselves that way. I mean, which is even worse.
Right.
If you see, it's one thing for somebody to see me as a ne'er do well criminal, uh, dark type of person, and it's another
Mm-hmm.
thing for me to believe it. It's
Right.
another thing for me to take it on as my image. And so,
Psychological warfare.
yeah, it's psychological. It's some heavy, heavy psychology going on with that.
Right, right, absolutely, and it is unfortunate. Moving on. By the way, Jazakallah khair again. Thank you again for taking the time to be on the show and help I guess the audience understand the history of how this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Next thing I would like to ask is how do you think the narrative has changed for the black community in terms of representation in cinema?
Well,
I would say in the more recent years.
in recent years, I'm seeing more cogent uh, representation in films.
What does cogent mean?
Cogent mean more thoughtful,
Mm-hmm.
more where people are really paying attention to a more what do you call it, holistic narrative of black life. It's not just one
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
You had now even it's come under criticism. I remember the Cosby Show, for example.
Mm-hmm.
People said that wasn't real. Well, I grew up in the black community. I mean, everybody I knew was black. I grew up with black
Mm-hmm.
doctors, dentists. I mean, I was in the hood in the
Mm-hmm.
day. All of us lived together because of a whole number of reasons:
Yeah.
gerrymandering, redlining, etc. So
Yeah.
it wasn't uncommon to have your teachers living in the same community with you. It wasn't uncommon to have dentists and doctors living in the same community. And that's what I grew
Mm-hmm.
up with. So
Mm-hmm.
we had the whole gamut of black life in that community.
Mm-hmm.
And And so it wasn't unreal for me to see a show that had doctors and lawyers and this type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You also have other films. You know, you look at some of the films with Denzel and Morgan Freeman, and that they put out. There's been some really quality work done. It's not
Mm-hmm.
enough, but it's starting to become. Or even Samuel L. Jackson, who's played in a whole kaleidoscope of different roles. You
Yes.
know, and then with roles for black women, not as great,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but you know, but it's getting a little better. And
Mm-hmm.
but that film industry, man, is powerful. It is a
Mm-hmm.
powerful uh, tool, and
Yeah.
people, you know, when you see, you want to see a variety of things in film in industry. Sometimes I don't even know. Maybe we should just, you know, there was a point where we wouldn't even let our kids watch TV because it was so damaging
Mm-hmm.
that we just stopped it because the imagery was just too ugly.
Yeah.
And so, but it's gotten a tad bit better, but you still see that, and there's still, if you understand the culture, it used to be the far right groups or the Klan, Aryan
Mm-hmm.
Nation, them would have rallies and they would gin up hatred of black folks by
Mm-hmm.
making all this imagery up in their minds. I mean, they had these rallies, and I couldn't understand for years why there was that much hatred against black people. And
Mm-hmm.
then when after I saw the documentaries and saw what they are saying at these rallies, I'm saying, oh, that's the
Mm-hmm.
problem. Now you add that into the culture with television, with radio,
Mm-hmm.
and then not only that, but in all quarters of this society, whether
Mm-hmm.
that be in churches, in the government, with law enforcement, etc. That information, that narrative was in all quarters of the society,
Mm-hmm.
and people, in fact, I would dare say that many joined the police force just to keep black people in line.
Right.
You know, and it's a long history of that. So the role that media plays is, I guess, dynamic, if you want to call it that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's damaging also to the
Right.
black community.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to wrap things up, what films or TV shows do you recommend that everyone should watch just to understand the true history of the struggle of the black community in the United States?
Well, there's not too many films. I like the latest film that I watched, Hidden Figures. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I like Glory because it talked about, it gave a fairly accurate picture of what happened back during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a few films like that. Documentaries, I think, are better
Yes.
because Citizen King, you have Ghosts of Mississippi, you have things that really show the truth of what
Mm-hmm.
happened. Lately, Netflix had the assassination of Malcolm X out. Well, we've
Absolutely.
always, the black community at the time that I was growing up, we always felt that the government did it.
Yeah.
We were never convinced that this was just
Mm-hmm.
something went bad in the Nation of
Just
Islam. No,
random. Yeah.
yeah, it was the government. The government didn't want him around.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel like that about Dr. King also. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we've lived long enough to we've seen these things happen. And, when you think about it, the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover,
Yeah.
wanted to stop a black, what he called a messiah from arising,
Yeah.
that would come about and lead the people out of darkness or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So those are just a few of the ones. I don't know many films that I
What
would
do you think
recommend.
of what do you think of the Roots series? Roots.
Roots
The
was
the
good. I
older
mean,
one,
yeah,
not the remake, but
no,
the
no.
older
I
one.
saw the older one, and I mean, it was the real deal at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting about Roots was that Alex Haley was still alive, and Alex Haley was narrating it, and he was the one that actually was telling the story of his family.
Mm-hmm.
Other documentaries like that. You remember Prince Among Slaves? We
I
brought
want to say
when
yes.
yeah when we actually did the debut of that here in Dallas, and we
Mm-hmm.
brought the family members the descendants of Abdurrahman
Mm-hmm.
from so yeah, we liked Roots was a really good uh, what do you call those kind of when they go long like that?
I
But
mean, it was a mini series,
it
but it
was
was
a
just to show the progression of. I mean, through one, I guess, perspective to show what happened during the slave trade, and a generation of a family generation growing up throughout the years, and just to see the progression and what led them to freedom, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. Well, there was another film like that that Steven Spielberg did. It was called, I think, Antioch or something like that. It was a film
Mm,
that showed slaves being captured and brought over.
mm-hmm.
And I'm not one that thinks that we need to show just slavery because our history is deeper than just slavery. We never
Right.
show the thousands of black inventors and
Mm-hmm.
intellectuals and all those people like W.D. Du Bois, Gwendolyn Brooks, Daniel
Mm-hmm.
Hale Williams. We never showed that side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another problem with the film industry is that we get caught up in the degradation of black
Mm-hmm.
folks to such a degree that we are just enthralled with it. I mean, we have such a rich history that goes
Mm-hmm.
beyond slavery, beyond Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
People who have contributed, built this country, contributed in very significant ways, and we rarely see many of those stories
Mm-hmm.
because the other stuff, the old "if it bleeds, it leads" or whatever you call it. So
Yeah.
people want to see ugly people getting whooped and shot at and all this type of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
I thought Hidden Figures was a good film. And there's a few others, but it's not that many.
Right. So I guess to wrap up, what advice I guess would you say to any young people who want to I guess be involved in defending rights of the American people, or anything like that, or at least anybody who wants to tell the stories? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say get educated first. I mean, and be balanced. As Muslims, we're supposed to be balanced in the way that we
Mm-hmm.
see things. That's the most difficult part of this whole thing. We have to be balanced. We have to build coalitions that promote justice and mutual understanding. We have to vote,
Yes.
but in terms of activism, not everybody can do civil rights work, nor do they
Mm-hmm.
want to. It's a real funny place to be.
Mm-hmm.
First, number one is because you're actually fighting with folks and you're trying to build relationships at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody gets famous in civil rights work. You become infamous.
Yeah.
All of the icons that I have uh, look up to, like Malcolm, Fannie Lou Hamer, and all these folks, they're dead. They didn't become lovable until they died. Nobody liked them. Dr. King, people
Mm-hmm.
hated him while he was alive. He
Yeah.
wasn't loved, and no matter what they say, I know what they were saying about him.
Mm-hmm.
So, educate yourself, learn as much as you can, learn a lot of the good,
Mm-hmm.
enjoying with people who have the same type of understanding, and just become active. Now, there's many parts to it. If you can't do civil rights work where you have to stand for what's right or
Mm-hmm.
fight or whatever you want to call it, then do interfaith work. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All these pieces come together for good. So
Mm-hmm.
do what turns you on. I mean, do what you like to do best.
Beautiful. Well said. Brother Mustafaa Caroll, thank you again so much for taking the time to be on Real Time, where we are live talking about film and television and everything in between. And I will get back to you in just a minute. Thank you
All right.
again.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Excellent. All right, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed this live stream of Real Time, where we are live talking about film and television and everything in between. If y'all did, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you share it and turn on that post notification down below. Again, just a reminder that this Friday is going to be joining us at 6, talking about her journey entering into the journalistic world. So make sure you are tuned in for that. And if you would like to sponsor an episode of Real Time, make sure you go into the description down below and contact me. and we can make that happen. This is Mustafaa Talib with Cinema King Productions signing off, and I will see y'all in the next one. Peace out.